My name is Adam Gosling from APNIC. This is the session IP-based geolocation issues. If possible, I'd like to run this session in the following way. I have three speakers. I'd like them to come to the lectern and present, but can we leave questions until the end? And then we'll kind of run it as a bit of an informal panel. This session is really about getting input from the community, and it's a discussion about the issue. It's not only about the presentations. The presentations are meant to serve as an introduction to the topic that we're going to talk about. So to begin with, I'd like to ask Anna to come up and present IPv4 transfers in 2005, stats and observations.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anna. I'm from APNIC. This afternoon, I'll be presenting about V4 transfers in 2015. And in the first part of my presentation, I'll be covering about statistics. It's always a challenge to present in the afternoon, especially after lunch, so I hope you find it interesting enough. And then later on, I will be giving you some observations from these stats. Okay, so to begin with, we would like to show you the data of the merger and acquisition transfers that we've done in APNIC from the last 5 years. And as you can see from the graph, we have a flat growth in terms of the number of M&A transfers that we've done. Maybe in 2012, there's a bit of growth with a total of 81, but if you look at 2015, we basically have the same number of 46 transfers as compared to 2011. Okay, the next slide shows the total number of market transfers that we have processed in my APNIC, which is very different because, as you can see from the graph, we have a steady growth of market transfers happening in the region. As you can see from the last 3 years, from 2013 to 2015, there's been a steady growth of market transfers happening. And in fact, if we compare the total number of transfers in 2015, we have 180, which is about 5 times more compared to what we've processed in 2011. So now in this slide, we compare the number of transfers between M&A and market, and we can see here that the trending growth is happening basically for market transfers. If we look at 2015 alone, we can see that the number of market transfers is 4 times more compared to M&A. And again, if we compare that at the start of 2011, when the market transfers started kicking off, we had less market transfers compared to M&A. Okay, so let's take a closer look at these market transfers happening within the region. If we count by the number of actual transactions between APNIC members, in 2015, we have a total of 142. So that's like 4 times larger compared to 2011 when we started the policy. Now, if we look at the actual number of IP addresses that's been transferred between APNIC accounts, we have a total of around 10 million IP addresses. So that's around /9. So this is the total number. And if you can see here, in 2014 and 2015, we do have a large number of IPv4 addresses that's been transferred to between APNIC members through market transfers. So in 2014, we have about 2.7 million IP addresses, and in 2015, we have about 2.5 million IP addresses. Okay, so for inter-RIR market transfers, in the last 4 years, we do get a bit of number of transfers happening from other RIRs. If you can see here, in 2014 and 2015, we have 36 and 38 inter-RIR transfers respectively. Now, I have to say that all these transfers are between ARIN and APNIC. We've just started the policy between RIPE, NCC, and APNIC, but from 2015, we haven't had completed or approved any transfers between RIPE, NCC, and APNIC. So basically, all this data is coming from ARIN and APNIC region. Okay, so to make it more interesting, we would like to show you the actual number of IP addresses that's been transferred from ARIN region to APNIC. And from the last 4 years, we have a total of 5.4 million IP addresses that's been transferred from ARIN region to APNIC. And as you can see here, there's a large number of transfers. The transfers that happened in 2015, we've done around 3.7 million IP address transfer from ARIN to APNIC. Okay, the next slide shows the transfer that happened from APNIC to ARIN region. And from the last 4 years, we've only seen this activity happening in 2015. So from last year, we've made a total of 3 transfers from ARIN to APNIC. So we call this outgoing transfers. And it is a total of around 10,000 IP addresses. And perhaps we can note that last year, ARIN has reached their exhaustion stage in terms of IPv4 supply. So I'm not sure if it's related to it, but from this graph, we can show that the transfer started from last year when they reached exhaustion. Okay, now moving to the observations that we have from these transfers that we receive from APNIC. Well, definitely based on the data that I have given, we have been receiving more and more market transfers. We can see that from just last year, we have a total of 180. Another observation is the increased number of transfers happening from the final 103/8. And some of these transfers are even delegated less than a year. Another observation are the inter-RIR transfers happening within the same organization. Basically, these are large companies or organizations who have presence both in ARIN and APNIC region, and sometimes they do transfer some of their resources to some part of their companies that is located in other part of the world. And then the last observation is transfer of multiple accounts. So basically, these are few numbers of APNIC accounts transferring their IP addresses to the same organization. I'll explain more details about that in my next few slides. Okay, so this graph shows the number of market transfers happening from the final /8. And as you can see here, we have quite a bit in 2015 with a total of 67. Now let me tell you some of the examples of these transfers. Okay, so I'm just trying to recall the requests that I've encountered myself. The first one I would say would be those small companies who come to APNIC, they can justify a small amount of IP address to obtain IP address from APNIC. And since they can't get the IP address from their upstream provider, they would go directly to us. But then at some point, they could not sustain the business. So after they close their membership with us, instead of returning the IP address to APNIC, they would just sell and transfer their IP address to another organization. So that's one type of case. Another case would be for those companies who sign up for membership through membership referrals. So they would like their upstream provider to apply membership on their behalf and get IP address because, again, they can't get the IP address from their upstream provider. But then at a certain point, they are more comfortable having their upstream provider managing the IP address for them. So they would transfer their IP address to the upstream accounts, but they would remain using those IP addresses. So that's the second case. And third case are for those large companies who have many child companies, and they have their own company registrations, they have their own network, but at some point, they would like to consolidate all their resources under one account. So In those type of cases, they have two options. Either they can go merger acquisition or go market transfer. So those are the three type of cases. Now, this graph shows the delegations that happened within, well, less than a year. As you can see from this graph, we have many of these activities happening in 2012. And from 2013 to 2015, we have less of those cases. I would say this is due to the change of policy, because in 2012, we've started a needs-based policy for transfer. And before that, we've seen a lot of movements of transfers happening. So after that policy has been implemented, we see less and less of transfers happening, even less than a year of getting the IP address from the final 103/8. Okay, this one I mentioned about inter-area transfer happening within the same organization. Again, these are the big companies who have, say, for example, a company in the US, and say, for example, they do have a branch in Singapore. What they do is they transfer part of their IP addresses to their office in Singapore because, obviously, they probably have more IP address in the US, so they would like to help their company in Singapore to be able to establish their network. So they transfer some part of their IP address in the US to sustain their network in the APNIC region. So these are the cases where, say, for example, company A has a company in Asia, they would transfer part of their resources or IP addresses in the Asian region. So in 2014 and 2015, we've seen a few of these cases happening. 2014, we have 5 companies who've done this kind of transfer, and in 2015, we had a total of 4. Well, that's it for my presentation. We can take questions later, right?
Yes, sorry if that's okay with everyone. Thank you very much, Anna. Vivek? Vivek's going to scale the difficult side, the steep ascent. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon again. Vivek from APNIC, and I would like to talk about IP-based geolocation and Whois Database. Some of the areas I want to talk about include the actual complaints we get from our members, what geographical attributes are available in Whois, what you need to know about these attributes, and a GeoHelp document we plan to work on to try and better understand what the problem is. Now, we all know that geolocation providers use different sources to gather IP information. They look at routing systems, how IPs are routed, mobile GPS devices, they do data mining, and possibly some of them also look at the registry data, so the data APNIC publishes. Now, there has been an increase in the number of geolocation complaints we get, and we are not sure why this is happening. One possible reason could be that, as Anna explained, there are a lot of transfers we process, a lot of resources we delegate also come from recycled address pool, which means other organizations have used them in the past, and if any geolocation provider is looking at the APNIC data, they might not be looking at the right data, or possibly they're not checking it as often as they should. We don't know. Okay, so in the next few slides, I want to show you some of the actual complaints we have got from our members. So the most common ones we get are about incorrect IP geolocation. So in this example, the member is located in Philippines, and when they try to download content from CDNs or go to websites like speedtest.net, they're getting picked as being in Adelaide, in Australia. So they want our help to fix this problem. Then we get complaints about the accuracy of geolocation. So in this example, the geolocation information at the country level is correct, but the information at the more specific city or state level is incorrect. And again, they need our help. And then we have no geolocation information. So in this case, our member said when they access Google Play Store, they can't detect any location information about the IP. What can be done? And then we also get complaints about filtering based on IP geolocation. So this was a request we only received last week, where the members located in New Zealand, they're routing their IPs in US, and even though MaxMind and other geolocation providers pick it up as US, their emails are getting filtered because it's getting picked as being from New Zealand. So this is the actual bounce message they're getting. Mailbox unavailable. Sorry, we do not accept emails from New Zealand. Yeah. So it appears there are some people who do email filtering based on IP geolocation. So as you can imagine, all these different types of geolocation issues, they lead to a lot of customer complaints. So this is a little more severe example where a member had 2 pools of IPs. One of them had geolocation issues, the other one was fine. And so they were having to ask their customers to reboot and just hope they get an IP from the clean block, which is not a good solution. So as you can imagine, they were not happy, and they again needed our help to fix this problem. So now that you hopefully have some understanding of the type of complaints we get, let's have a look at what geographical attributes are there in the Whois. So some of these attributes of interest include the country attribute, which has the 2-letter country code. We have the geoloc attribute, which has some location, latitude, longitude coordinates, and a description attribute, where people can put a physical address or a PO box address. And the conventions on how these attributes should be used, it may not be clear. So for APNIC delegations, the objects have consistent meaning. But for other delegations, like the ones our members register for their customers through customer assignments, there are no enforcements on what they should mean. So for example, a member could register a customer assignment to show who their customers are, or they could also register a customer assignment to show where the network is located. It's entirely up to the member. So this is an example of an APNIC delegation. So as you can see in the description attribute, we mentioned the organization who has received this, the address where this organization is registered, as well as the country where this organization is registered, so Australia in this case. And then we also maintain the stats file, which has similar data. It says what the resource is, when it was delegated, and the country where it was delegated. So what do you need to know about all these attributes? Well, for APNIC delegation, so the portable blocks, we record the economy where your organization is registered. So we only use the country attribute to show which country your organization is registered in. We don't put any geoloc details because we're not trying to give any hints where your network is deployed. And then this same data is exported to our public stats file. Now for our member delegations, this is where there's some ambiguity. They can register customer assignments to indicate where the network is located, and they might do this by using the country attributes or the geoloc attributes. Now, it is important to note here that we do not enforce any conventions or check for correctness of this data. So these attributes, therefore, they may not be reliable, or they could even be deliberately misleading. Okay, so let me show you a case study which shows the effects on GeoIP location after we processed an address transfer. So in this example, in June last year, we did a resource transfer from an Australian member to a New Zealand member. So this was done under the merger acquisition policy. So once it was complete, we updated all the APNIC delegation to reflect now the organization is in New Zealand. And everything was fine for a few months, but after that, the member came back and started complaining about geolocation issues. They're saying they're all pointing to New Zealand now, and even though the network is still in Australia, the customers are still in Australia, this is causing problems. So at this stage, we gave the usual support we give them. We asked them to register customer assignments, try geoloc coordinates, but none of that made any difference. And later on, we identified that in this case, the geolocation provider was only looking at the APNIC delegation and not what the customer was registering. So through this case study and other similar ones, we have observed that there are some confusions about what registry data should be used for geolocation and how frequently it is being used. There's also some confusion about the impact of this geolog attribute. Is it widely used? The last time I checked, only about 130 of our 5,000 plus members have used the geolog attribute, and we don't know for sure if any geolocation providers are even looking at this data. And then APNIC continues to get asked for a lot of advice and help on these type of geolocation problems. So to get a better understanding of what the problem is, we are planning to do some work on a geo-help document. So we want to do some research on how IP address-based geolocation is gathered and consumed, how the APNIC data is used in building geolocation, and the objective of this document is to help us provide a clear guide to those who need help, as well as for us to provide better support to our members. And to conclude this presentation, there are some questions I have for all of you to consider. Questions like, what do you think is APNIC's responsibility? So the data we generate through APNIC delegations, is that sufficient, or is there something more we should do? And likewise, what do you think is the members' responsibility? The data they generate through customer assignments, geolog, is that sufficient, or should they be doing something different? What should be enforced? What should be left optional? And what's next? Well, I don't think I know what's next. That really depends on what all of you think all of us should be doing to try and address some of these issues. That's all I have.
Thank you, Vivek. So there's a little bit of background information from our experiences as staff at APNIC. Matthew may be known to some of you. I don't have a bio for him. He can perhaps explain a little bit of his background, and he's going to present some information about the New Zealand survey into what end users want from geolocation.
Hi, everybody. First of all, just want to say thanks to the guys at APNIC for saying come along and have a chat about this. I'm up here because of some conversations that were happening over a lunch yesterday, and also to anybody on New Zealand Internet Societies who's in the room, you know, played a big role in some of the debate that was happening last year. So we'll just see how we work this. Okay. So I'm going to start off by playing a video, then I'll give you a little bit about my background, and then we'll move into talking about some of the local New Zealand research.
Kiwis love watching films and TV as much as the rest of the world. We want to watch the same shows at the same time as our friends on their OEs. So why do we have to wait? Plugging our ears at the water cooler, avoiding social media for days when we are perfectly willing to pay. In New Zealand, there are a number of channels where you can legitimately access online content. But why does a consumer in the US have more choice than a Kiwi when we are supposed to be paying for the same product? Geo-blocking means that Kiwi consumers are prevented from buying some overseas goods online. This is like going to a supermarket, loading up your trolley, and then being told at the checkout you're not allowed to buy what you want because you live in New Zealand. Internet NZ supports sensible copyright law that protects content producers and allows consumers a fair choice. We want all Kiwis, both home and overseas, to be able to watch up-to-the-minute entertainment, media and news. We have an opportunity coming up in the next Copyright Act review to find a way that protects content producers and allows for digital innovation. What do you think? Join in the conversation now at internetnz.nz.
Okay, so let me just provide a little bit of background about that. About 3 years ago, we built a geo-unblocking solution that plugged directly into New Zealand telco networks, and the reason we did that was because there were no paid streaming options in New Zealand, and what we wanted to see was more competition happening in the media market. So just as a show of hands, who here actually uses some form of VPN or DNS geo-unblocking service? Can you put your hand up? So we're talking probably over half of the audience. Just also so I know who's in the room, if you're in New Zealand, if you're a New Zealander who's either used global mode, provided global mode to your customers, or been involved in discussions around the geo unblocking issue, can you also raise your hand? Okay, cool. So we've got a mostly international audience. Basically what happened is we realised that you had to be a technical user if you wanted to get access to a streaming service from overseas. And in New Zealand we had some legislation that allowed you to remove a technical prevention measure based on a geographic restriction. And we had pretty clear parallel import law, which meant you're allowed to buy DVDs off Amazon. So what we did was put in place the technology inside the telco, which meant to the end user, the network service that they were trying to access, maybe BBC iPlayer, could be Hulu, could be Amazon, a range of services was just transparent to the user. So you could get access to your local services, and you could get access to Netflix before it came to New Zealand, and you could get access to BBC iPlayer without having to make any network configurations. So what I'm going to show you is some of the research that happened at that time. The reason this is, and kind of what I'm up here to do, is provide just a different perspective on what issues are occurring from a consumer perspective, and this is going to give you some insight into kind of the way that, I guess, our end user customers on the telco networks are thinking. So if we could just move to the next slide. So this research was done in April by a third-party organisation called Horizon Research. Asked a really simple question. In your view, should New Zealanders be able to access offshore streaming websites without being geo-blocking? And it was relatively overwhelmingly in favour of the removal of geo-restriction blocks. So I'll go into a little bit more depth if we can move on to the next slide. So the survey went into a little bit more detail and looked under what circumstances was that the case. In parallel, one of the national newspapers ran a poll of its survey members to see what the overall opinion of New Zealand broadcasters was, and 97% said that they really weren't doing a good enough job for what the consumer demand was for. So they went into more depth to look at what the impact was, and to give you an idea of the scale of this, I think at the time the research said that around 8.1% of New Zealanders had used the Global Mode platform, because we were sitting in, I believe, 22 ISPs at the time. And at the time of the research, I believe 5.3% were actively using the platform and 3.1% had previously used it. So it was a relatively wide scale, and when you correlate that to what against the population, it basically meant there were around 220,000 people that were using the some type of geo-based technology on the platform. So really you can see there's quite a wide range of perspectives on it. Yes, I want to be able to use geolocation under all circumstances. I want to be able to use it when it's going to give me a price difference. I want to be able to use it when it's going to give me access to content that I could not otherwise get access to previously. But if you look back in some of our local history, what we see is when we put in place the parallel import law and allowed the importation of DVDs into the New Zealand market, we saw a shortening of delivery times for DVDs from 12 to 24 months. So when this type of competition comes in market, what we see is price reduction, which has a flow-on impact. And really, when we start to think about why this solution was going to be something that was useful, it was more around the fact that we wanted to give consumers a reason to upgrade fibre. And we all know that really content is the driver for increased fibre uptake. So it was a very small percentage of people said that I don't want to have this available under any circumstances. Okay, but so we ran this session at NetWhois, the ISOC NetWhois that happened here last year. The session, you can see the URL on this page, but if you go to my blog on Bypass, all of these resources are available, the PowerPoint, the URLs, and some quite in-depth data and information about what happens at a regional level across quite a few of the countries in Asia Pacific. But the discussion is much wider than just the updating of address information at a network level. To give you an idea, we had one situation middle of about 2 years ago where we kind of broke about 2,500 Sony TVs because they had an OS update that we weren't aware of. And we found out about it because consumers started taking their televisions back to the retail outlet, which caused a bit of issue with one of our telco customers and obviously the retail chain and the vendor. So we kind of had to get into the middle of it and find out exactly what was going on. So it does have quite a wide-ranging effect on all different types and areas of the market. When it came to the debate, what actually occurred in the New Zealand market was we had 4 or 5 media players all get together and serve us a lawsuit. I think we're the second most talked about technology story behind Kim.com. Not somebody I really want to associate my name with, but it was something that did get discussed at quite a national level. And when we started to get into forums to discuss this as a community, we really looked at what the potential was, because we in New Zealand have some pretty good legislation around consumer protection law. We don't have government level blocking, and when you started to look at what the potential consequence of from this discussion happening in a court, it could have set some quite big ramifications from an international precedent. And when we had the last international conference here, it was quite obvious to see how many markets were looking at what was happening in this region at the time. But what you can see is that this is a much bigger issue than you kind of really think when you think about geolocation issues. It comes down to the right to use a VPN. It comes back to underlying principles around copyright, how information is stored and fought around the internet, how media companies have rights for regional exclusivity, but what are the consumers' rights associated with their choice to purchase content. The information that I'm presenting at the moment is all public information, but anecdotally we have data about the fact that when we introduced the service, it had a major impact on the reduction of piracy. And some of the other key concerns that really came out of the session was that we don't in New Zealand have closed captions, so none of the streaming services are suitable for those that have any form of disability. Internationally, at the same time, if you have a look at what's happening up in Europe, the European Commission is looking about the way that you move data between different countries and the right to use services that are geo-based when you move and travel between locations. So it's quite a complex issue when you're looking at both the consumer perspective and a policy perspective. So I'll just leave you with the last slide. And based on the research that we have from New Zealand and from global web trends of the survey data from last year, which is you can see on our website on the blog, on average you've got nearly 1 in 4 internet users that are changing their IP location. So it's a much bigger discussion that I think we should be having around why this is occurring, not only just the allocation of IP for space between network providers, but why are the end users actually moving and determining and managing their own IP address space. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Matthew. So I see this as quite an interesting issue because it seems to be geolocation is good or bad depending on where you're standing and what you're trying to do. And I'm sure that's the same for end users, whether they're trying to watch streaming services that they're not able to access in their current location, or if they're trying to do something, like access their banking site and the bank doesn't believe where they are. So I'm sure there's a lot of perspectives on this. I know there's a couple of people in the audience who have indicated an interest in speaking at the mic, but basically I want to open the floor up to see what the community thinks about geolocation and what role APNIC can play and how we can serve the community in this area. Thank you, Owen.
Owen DeLong, Akamai. We have a little bit of a geolocation database around the world. We know where a few IP addresses hide anyway. We don't use Whois. I mean, we might use it as an input if we don't have any other data about an address, but that might last for a couple of hours until we ping it or something. For the most part, what's in Whois is completely irrelevant to our geolocation. And the RIRs are not really in a position to help with that. When we do get it wrong, the best thing to do is send an email to peering@akamai.com, and we try to take care of that very rapidly. We try very hard to not get it wrong, and we're very willing to work with people on getting it fixed. Taking off my Akamai hat and putting on my personal hat, geofencing your content is a pretty stupid thing to do. Consumers don't like it. It's yet another form of broken DRM that just says, yes, you're paying for this content, but we want to tell you how you can use it instead of letting you just, pay for the content and do what you want with it. And, it used to be you could go into the record store, buy the record, and take the record wherever you want. I don't know why content producers have suddenly decided that model is no longer acceptable, but they need to get over it. They need to recognize that consumers have what they want to do, and their job is to sell that to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Carlos. I work for another IRR, but I'm speaking strictly personal. I wonder how we can do something about this. I completely agree with these initiatives or actually providing some form for people to get around restrictions. But on the other hand, I think that the content deliverers, like let's say Netflix, Hulu, whatever, they probably don't like the geofencing either. This is a problem with the heavily broken and dysfunctional business models of the content industry. And I'm not sure how with technology people can do anything about that. Oh yeah.
Thank you. Dean?
Dean Pemberton, Internet NZ. Oh, spook. I like that. Every year when I get to the mic, I end up with a new nickname for the year, and the last one was Panel Beater, and this one looks like Spook. Awesome. So, hi, Dean Pemberton, Internet NZ. Look, trying to discern someone's physical location by anything to do with their IP address is just the same as trying to discern what colour shoes they're wearing. It actually bears very little resemblance, and we've seen with products like Mats that you can basically take an entire ISP or country and lie about this. So I think APNIC is getting it right at the moment with the level of involvement that they want to have in this. I agree with the previous speaker. I don't think this is a technical problem waiting to happen. I believe all of the motivations for this are on the content side. I don't think this is a technical thing. I don't see why a technical community particularly wants to get in and drive some of the stuff here. I think recording where the organisation was that was the member that applied for this is probably where we want to go. There is no way that you're going to be able to tell, let alone record, let alone maintain the records of where each individual IP address is. It's the same as having a Whois record for what colour shoes the person's wearing while they're using it.
Thank you. Hi, Kathy.
Sandra Brown, IPv4 Market Group. So I would look at this from the perspective of the recipient of an IPv4 transfer. And my experience with this is occasionally in APNIC region, when you have IPs transferred from country to country, it takes some amount of time for the geolocators to update. And I've had a few complaints from recipients of IPs. And our experience is that if they do nothing, it seems to take about 3 months. And I'm not sure what the mechanism is if, as Owen said, the geolocator database systems don't use RIR data. So I don't know what the mechanism is then for how the updated information in the APNIC database gets propagated to the geolocation systems. And if the recipient of the IPs does reach out to the geolocator systems, it seems to be very fast for the updates. So I always recommend that recipients contact the geolocator providers. And it is a problem for many recipients because they don't like their users doing Google searches in, you know, Singapore and seeing, you know, Chinese data, that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
Mark Foster from NIWA, but speaking personally. I see two distinct issues here, and look, I know Matt Jackson well, and I know what he's been doing, and I believe in what was said before, that geofencing is stupid, and I don't think there's any disputing that from the view of most Kiwis in the room at least. However, I'm not sure that's anything that at APNIC level that can really be solved. I think if a company chooses to geofence their data, it's a commercial decision that they've chosen to make, and there's probably other forums where they need to be browbeaten into submission on that one. But speaking about geolocation in general, my frustration as an end user has always been in the drama that there is in trying to get information updated in terms of geolocation. At the moment, it seems to be almost a commercial undertaking. There are several different geolocation providers who use clearly not RIR-driven means to determine the location of an IP address. It is a complex process for people, especially who are unfamiliar with the industry, to try and have geolocation information updated. And I'm not sure that if RIR data is not being used, I'm not sure there's much we can do, but perhaps what would be really nice would be some sort of single point of update for people to go to where they can, at registration time or at resource transfer time, provide location information to whatever degree is appropriate in one place and know that that information will get to all the geolocation providers rather than me having to chase half a dozen of them around the world because a couple of them are out of date. That's my nirvana. I just don't know that this is the forum that's actually going to achieve that. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Hello, James Tingervids from Internet NZ. I'd like to add a perspective on this so I work in policy. I'm a colleague of Dean's, but he's tech savvy and I've got a background in law. And the issues here do come up prominently in copyright and distribution of streamed video content, but they also go much broader. So our government was proposing to change tax laws, is proposing to change tax laws to make it easier to tax overseas services, the likes of Netflix or Spotify or whatever else it might be. And they're proposing to put an obligation on these overseas services to collect tax. Now, how do you do that? It would be quite convenient from the government point of view if there's a good way to technically earn from. And most law in this area is still drafted in terms of IP addresses. So as someone working on policy issues, I'd like to know what the parameters are, whether that works and whether it doesn't. I'm taking Dean's word that it doesn't. People have purposes that they clearly are using geolocation for, and it turns out to be quite important whether that's a statistical indication. You know, so when you're looking at an aggregate data set, you can say what the distribution of locations is versus this one person is in this one place. The way the tax change could have worked is if you're using a VPN, say you've got a corporate network that's based across Australia and New Zealand, if you make online purchases and you appear to be in the Sydney office, suddenly you're committing tax evasion. And your IT people may be accessories in that criminal offence. Now, as a policy person, I think it should never be the case that that sort of potential liability affects your technical decisions. But I and the people working for the government need to understand what the realistic parameters are for this mode of geolocation, and when you rule it out, absolutely, and when you say it's useful for this purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. Alan?
Hello, this is Alan Barrett from APRICOT. I've heard a few people seem to wish for a way that holders of IP addresses could tell the geolocation providers what their location is. And I have a suggestion for some future work that could make this easier. There's a thing called a DNS lock record, which nobody uses, which was specified in 1996 when we were just about doing the transition from the old classful networks to the classless thing that we do today. So how to use a lock record to talk about the location of, say, a /19 or a /23 or something is not at all well specified. But somebody could write up a document that specifies how to use lock records, and then people who want to announce their location could start using them. Thanks.
Oh, Clay.
Okay. Hi, Clay and APNIC. I'm following the Adobe, and Ben Martin has a couple of questions. He asks, can the geolocation service be asked to reload data from Whois when a block is transferred? And do they provide an update service that address holders can access?
Thank you, Clay. I'm not sure that anyone's really in a position to speak to that. Does anyone feel confident? Sanjay is going to have a shot. Lou, Owen?
Part of the GeoHelp project that Vivek mentioned earlier was actually to attempt an outreach to the geolocation provider so we can answer that kind of question. At the moment, we don't have enough good relations with the geolocation provider to be able to do so. And we intend to actually start having a conversation with them. We don't know whether we can solve the problem or not, but at least, you know, just like security is so big that the first thing we need to do is just start this conversation. So we intend to have these conversations with the geolocation providers.
Thank you, Sanjay.
Owen DeLong, Akamai geolocation provider, quote unquote. We don't start with a load from Whois, so we wouldn't reload from Whois. We measure where things are by a variety of means that are proprietary, and I'm not going to get into those details in a public forum for the obvious reasons, but suffice it to say we're pretty good at knowing where most of the addresses we talk to are. And we learn that pretty quickly when they move. So I don't think notification when a block transfers to reload Whois is necessarily useful. Notification when a block transfers to pay attention to the fact that it transferred might be useful. And I think that we would certainly be willing to cooperate with any such notifications. And we do cooperate when we get notifications from address holders at peering@akamai.com. To address Alan's point, the problem with lock records is lock records don't tell you where the address is. They tell you where the person who controls DNS for the address wants you to think the address is. And lots of people have lots of reasons for wanting you to think addresses are in places other than where they are. So down that path lies madness. Finally, to respond to the tax question, it's very, very simple answer. When should you use geolocation for IPs for tax purposes or any other sort of legal liability? Never. It's nowhere near accurate enough for such a purpose, and even trying to apply a statistical correlation on something that might lead to criminal charges is utter folly. It's just a really, really, really bad idea. Don't do it. Just don't.
Can I just, before you go, Owen, Akamai is probably technically adept at finding where IP addresses are located. I guess not everyone is quite up to that standard.
We like to think so anyway.
But I guess there's some third-party providers who maybe don't try as hard or don't have as much incentive to get it right.
Well, people are welcome to use our database instead.
Thank you. Hi, Lou.
Lou from us. I'd just like to share a couple of our experiences with IIR database regarding the geolocations. We do operate in a couple of the regions, and we do get different feedback from different IIRs about requirement about geolocation of IP addresses. Some IIRs say, okay, it's no problem, whatever you put, you think, whatever you put in that attribute is your business, it's not a part of a need assessment. And some IIR require you to put the geolocation address to either the country where your company was based, or the location which was actually announced, or where the customer was based. So it does interfere and give you options about where you put your customer is, but that's one hand of the story. On another operation perspective, we do run a global infrastructure. We have servers in almost every continent, and we do get problems with when we're using our IP addresses in certain areas of the world, and customers come us to complain, for example, hey, my server is supposed to be located in US, but why, when you check in Google, it shows in Canada or Virginia or whatever. And then when we try to contact a geolocation provider, then it's been a very difficult process, and it's getting more complicated. There is multiple geolocation providers, and as everybody else just said, they clearly don't use the data which we provided in Whois, and they don't even use our announcement location as well, and they seem to have their own very unique idea about the location of our IP addresses and our customers, and the communication with them being very difficult. So I do think that is a problem, need to be addressed and solved. And last, as a user, the copyright thing and the content delivery especially, some of our customers want to control the content to be delivered to a certain country for the reason of their contract with the content, the IP they provide, the area they can just distribute, stuff like that. So we see quite frequently VPN users or proxy users to get over these boundaries. And I have to say some country on this planet has less copyright infringement enforcement than the others, and users trying to jump over these boundaries to get, free content. So that's my comment about the issue, and I hope I can contribute. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Hello, Clay, you're back.
Clay Aiken, APNIC, with Ben Martin on the Adobe again. Thanks, Sanjaya. This is interesting. And he asks, good topic for an informative technical presentation at future conference.
Thank you very much. Hello, Jessica.
Jessica Shen from CENIC. I'd like to share you the IP geolocation experience from CENIC. Yes, I have a very short slides here. Let me provide a little bit about the background on that. Actually, some big companies are very interested to get the IP geolocation database, which they can exactly know where a particular IP address is exactly located or used. So we have done some researches on that, and currently we have established the IP geolocation database that indicates the specific location where a particular IP address is used. This database is covering 99.95% of the provinces and 94% of the cities in China. According to my background just now, such database can be popular with CDN content companies or e-commerce companies to trace IP address, provide CDN service, make smart DNS resolution, or include accurate advertising, some other commercial things. So we have owned a comprehensive, accurate, and continuously updated database. The basic process we established the IP geolocation database are 3 steps. Maybe next slide. Thank you.
Oh, I think it might have been my fault.
We collect several IPv4 geolocation databases in China, analyze and mix them. Then we get a maximum of IP geolocation database. Second, we use CINIC's real geolocation database as the benchmark. Then we optimize the IP geolocation database by some technical methods, and we continuously update the database using such methods. I share it with you to see what your thoughts about our geolocation database, and see if we can cooperate on this area to establish a broader IP geolocation database. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Before you go, can I just be clear? This is a service provided by CINIC. So you run the database.
Yes.
And you make it freely available.
We are still doing the planning. We have completed the database, but we haven't decided how to operate it.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Any other takers? Comments, thoughts? Okay, I think we've got an early break. Thanks very much for your time, everyone. I think we're back.